Hey, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join our community and stay updated with real-life stories like this one. It was a regular Tuesday morning when my life turned upside down. I woke up to a string of notifications on my phone, each one more alarming than the last. My bank app showed a balance of zero, completely wiped out overnight. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. How could this happen? I'd been so careful with my passwords, always using a mix of letters, numbers, and symbols. I thought I was safe, untouchable even. But someone had gotten in, and they'd taken everything. I opened my email, hoping for answers, only to find a chilling message from my bank. Unauthorized transactions had drained my savings in a matter of hours. I felt my stomach drop, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the alerts. My entire life savings, gone. I called the bank immediately, but the automated system kept me on hold for what felt like forever. When I finally got through, the representative sounded sympathetic but helpless. They confirmed the worst. My account had been compromised. I sat there, frozen, trying to piece together how this could have happened to me. All I could think was, who did this? The bank representative asked if I'd shared my password with anyone, and I almost laughed. Share my password? Never. I'd learned early on to keep my personal info locked tight. But then they mentioned phishing scams and weak security questions. I started to doubt myself. Had I clicked a bad link? I remembered an email from what looked like my bank a week ago, asking me to verify my account. It seemed legit, with the right logos and everything. I'd entered my details without a second thought. Now, I realized that email was a trap, designed to steal my credentials. My mind raced back to the moment I typed in my password, oblivious to the danger. I felt so stupid, so naive. The rep explained that hackers often use these tactics to trick even the savviest people. But that didn't ease the sting of betrayal, not just by the hackers, but by my own carelessness. I hung up, my head spinning with regret and fear. What was I going to do now? I decided to dig deeper, desperate to understand how this happened. I logged into my laptop, checking every account I had. My email was compromised too. Someone had been reading my messages for days. They'd even changed my recovery phone number, locking me out of my own life. I felt violated, like someone had broken into my home and rummaged through my things. Every click revealed more damage. My PayPal, my Amazon, even my social media accounts. The hackers had been thorough, leaving no stone unturned. I tried to reset my passwords, but the damage was done. They'd already siphoned money from every corner of my digital life. I called my best friend, Sarah, hoping for some comfort, but she seemed distracted. She brushed it off, saying I'd figure it out and that she was busy. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. Why didn't she care? I needed her, and she wasn't there. My world was crumbling, and I had no one to turn to. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and frustration. I contacted my bank again, filing a fraud report, but they warned it could take weeks to investigate. Weeks. I didn't have weeks. I had bills to pay, rent due, and no savings left. I started checking my other accounts, hoping to salvage something. My credit card was maxed out with charges I didn't make, thousands spent on electronics and gift cards. I froze the card, but the damage was already done. My credit score, which I'd worked so hard to build, was now at risk. I felt like I was drowning, with no lifeline in sight. I kept thinking about that phishing email. How could I have fallen for it? I prided myself on being cautious, but they'd outsmarted me. I started researching online, reading about others who'd been hacked. Their stories were eerily similar. One mistake, and their lives were turned upside down. I wasn't alone, but that didn't make it any easier. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if they'd stolen my identity too? I checked my credit report, and sure enough, there were inquiries I didn't recognize. Someone had tried to open new accounts in my name. I placed a fraud alert on my credit, but the fear lingered. Every noise outside my apartment made me jump, as if the hackers were coming for me next. I know it sounds irrational, but I felt so exposed. My whole life was online. My banking, my shopping, my personal emails. And now, someone else had access to it all. I thought about Sarah again, wondering why she'd been so cold on the phone. We'd been friends since college, always there for each other. Or so I thought. I texted her again, asking if we could talk, but she didn't reply. I felt a pang of betrayal, sharper than the loss of my money. The next morning, I went to the police to file a report. They were kind but blunt. Cybercrimes like this were hard to trace. The hackers could be anywhere in the world, hiding behind fake IPs and stolen identities. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't expect to catch anyone. I left the station feeling defeated, like I was fighting an invisible enemy. Back home, I started changing every password I could think of, using a password manager this time. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything, kicking myself for not doing it sooner. I read up on phishing scams, learning how sophisticated they'd become. Fake websites, spoofed emails, even texts that looked like they came from trusted sources. It was terrifying to think how easily I'd been fooled. I kept checking my phone, hoping Sarah would reach out, but there was nothing. Her silence hurt more than I wanted to admit. Days passed, and the bank's investigation dragged on with no updates. I had to borrow money from my parents to cover rent, which was humiliating. They were supportive, but I could hear the worry in their voices. I felt like a failure, like I'd let everyone down. I started noticing little things that made me paranoid, like my laptop running slower than usual. Was it malware? Had the hackers planted something on my device? I ran every antivirus scan I could find, but nothing turned up. Still, the unease lingered. I stopped using public Wi-Fi, avoided checking my accounts on my phone, and even covered my webcam with tape. I know it sounds extreme, but I didn't know who to trust anymore. Even my best friend had let me down when I needed her most. I kept replaying our last call, wondering what I'd done to make her so distant. A week later, I got an email from the bank with an update. They'd traced some of the transactions to an overseas account, but recovering the money was unlikely. I felt a mix of anger and hopelessness. How could they just let this happen? I started researching ways to protect myself better. VPNs, encrypted email, the works. I was determined not to let this happen again. But the financial damage was only part of it. The emotional toll was worse. I felt like I'd lost control of my life, like I'd never feel safe again. I tried calling Sarah one more time, leaving a voicemail begging her to call me back. Still, nothing. I started to wonder if she was avoiding me on purpose. Had she known something? The thought crept into my mind, and I couldn't shake it. It was crazy, but I was starting to question everyone and everything. I decided to take a break from social media, worried that the hackers were still watching me. I deleted my accounts temporarily, cutting myself off from the world. It was isolating, but I couldn't risk more exposure. I started getting calls from debt collectors about accounts I didn't even know existed. The hackers had been busy, racking up debt in my name. I spent hours on the phone, explaining that I was a victim of fraud. Most were understanding, but it was exhausting to repeat the same story over and over. I felt like I was living someone else's nightmare. I kept thinking about Sarah, wondering why she hadn't checked in. We used to talk every day, share everything. Now, her silence felt like a second betrayal. I didn't want to believe she was involved, but the doubt was eating at me. By the end of the second week, I was mentally and physically drained. The bank had refunded a small portion of my money, but it wasn't enough to cover my losses. I started looking for side gigs to make ends meet, taking on freelance work late into the night. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that zero balance on my bank app. I kept checking my accounts obsessively, terrified of another breach. I'd become hypervigilant, second-guessing every email, every text. I even stopped using my debit card, sticking to cash whenever possible. The paranoia was taking over, but I didn't know how to stop it. And Sarah. Still no word. I was starting to accept that our friendship might be over, but I didn't understand why. It was like losing my money and my best friend all at once. I decided to confront Sarah directly. I drove to her apartment, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and desperation. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, almost guilty. I demanded to know why she'd been avoiding me. She hesitated, then admitted she'd gotten a weird email from me weeks ago, asking for money. She said she ignored it, thinking it was a scam, but never told me about it. I was stunned. Why didn't she warn me? That email was clearly part of the hack, and her silence let it spiral. She apologized, saying she didn't want to worry me, but it felt like a weak excuse. I left her apartment feeling betrayed all over again. My best friend had a chance to stop this, and she didn't. I drove home in tears, wondering how I'd misjudged her so badly. The hackers had taken my money, but Sarah's inaction hurt just as much. Back home, I dove into damage control, determined to rebuild my life. I set up fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus and froze my credit completely. It was a hassle, but it gave me some peace of mind. I also invested in a premium password manager and a VPN, vowing to never skimp on security again. I started educating myself on cybersecurity, watching videos and reading blogs about protecting my data. Knowledge was my only weapon now. I even attended a local workshop on identity theft, connecting with others who'd been through the same thing. Their stories gave me hope, but also a grim reality check. Recovery would be a long road. I kept thinking about Sarah's betrayal, replaying her excuses in my head. How could she not tell me about that email? I wanted to forgive her, but the trust was gone. The bank finally closed their investigation, recovering only a fraction of my stolen funds. It was better than nothing, but I was still in a financial hole. I took on a second job, working weekends to pay off the fraudulent charges. My social life took a back seat. I didn't have the energy or money to go out. I felt like a shadow of my former self, always looking over my shoulder. I started noticing how much of my life depended on digital systems, and it scared me. One weak link, and everything could collapse. I became obsessive about checking my accounts, sometimes multiple times a day. I knew it wasn't healthy, but I couldn't stop. Sarah texted me once, apologizing again, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to deal with her, not when I was still picking up the pieces of my life. I started getting therapy to cope with the stress and paranoia. My therapist helped me see that the hack wasn't my fault, but I still struggled with guilt. I kept thinking I should have been smarter, more cautious. She encouraged me to focus on what I could control, like rebuilding my financial security. I opened a new bank account with a different bank, one with stronger fraud protections. I also started budgeting meticulously, tracking every penny to avoid falling behind again. It was exhausting, but it gave me a sense of purpose. I still thought about Sarah, wondering if I'd ever trust her again. My therapist suggested writing her a letter to express my feelings, even if I didn't send it. I tried it, pouring out my anger and hurt. It helped, but it didn't erase the pain of her silence. Months later, I was starting to feel a bit more stable. My freelance work was picking up, and I'd paid off some of the fraudulent debt. But the emotional scars were still there. I didn't trust technology the way I used to. I double-checked every email, every link. I even started using a separate email for banking, just to be safe. I'd learned my lesson the hard way. No one was going to protect me but me. I still hadn't spoken to Sarah, though she'd left a few voicemails. Part of me wanted to reach out, but I wasn't ready. The hack had changed me, made me more guarded, less trusting. I hated that it had taken so much from me, not just my money, but my sense of security. I vowed to keep educating myself, to stay one step ahead of the hackers. I started sharing my story online, hoping to warn others about phishing scams. I posted on forums, joined support groups, and even started a blog. People reached out, sharing their own stories of being hacked. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, but also heartbreaking to see how common this was. I wrote about the red flags I'd missed, the fake email, the too good to be true links. I urged people to use two-factor authentication and password managers. My blog started gaining traction, and I felt a spark of purpose. Maybe I could turn this nightmare into something positive. I still hadn't heard from Sarah, but I was starting to let go of the anger. Her silence had hurt, but I couldn't change the past. I focused on moving forward, one step at a time. One day, I got an unexpected call from the police. They'd made a breakthrough in a larger cybercrime ring and thought my case might be connected. It wasn't much, but it gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe the hackers would face justice after all. I provided all the details I could, hoping it would help. The officer warned me that these cases rarely led to arrests, but I appreciated their effort. It felt good to know someone was fighting for me, even if the odds were slim. I kept up with my blog, sharing updates about my recovery. People commented, thanking me for raising awareness. It was humbling to think my story could help someone avoid the same fate. I still hadn't reached out to Sarah, but I was starting to think about forgiveness. Maybe it was time to heal that wound too. Financially, I was slowly getting back on my feet. I'd paid off most of the fraudulent debt and was rebuilding my savings. It wasn't easy, but I was proud of my progress. I'd also become a bit of a cybersecurity nerd, always learning about new threats and protections. I even started giving talks at local community centers, teaching people how to stay safe online. It felt empowering to take control of my narrative. I still had moments of paranoia, but they were less frequent now. I'd learned to live with a new normal, one where I was hyper-aware of my digital footprint. Sarah sent me a long email, apologizing again and asking to meet. I didn't respond right away, but I was starting to soften. Maybe I could give her a chance to explain, to rebuild what we'd lost. I decided to meet Sarah for coffee, my heart heavy with mixed emotions. She looked nervous, and I could tell she'd been carrying guilt. She explained that she'd been dealing with her own problems when the hack happened, which was why she'd been distant. She admitted she should have told me about the suspicious email, but she didn't realize how serious it was. I listened, trying to understand her side. It wasn't easy, but I could see she was genuinely sorry. I told her how much her silence had hurt, how it made me feel abandoned. We both cried, and for the first time in months, I felt a weight lift. We agreed to work on our friendship, to be more open with each other. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. I left the coffee shop feeling hopeful, like I was reclaiming a piece of my old life. By the end of the year, I was in a much better place. My blog had grown, and I was connecting with people all over the world. I'd even been invited to speak at a cybersecurity conference, which was both exciting and terrifying. I was still cautious with my online accounts, but I no longer lived in fear. The hack had changed me, but it had also made me stronger. I'd learned to value my privacy, to protect my data like it was gold. I'd also learned the importance of forgiveness, not just for Sarah, but for myself. I'd made mistakes, but I wasn't defined by them. I was a survivor, not a victim. I kept in touch with Sarah, slowly rebuilding our friendship. It wasn't the same as before, but it was honest. I was grateful for that, grateful for the chance to move forward. As I settled into my new routine, I started to see the hack as a turning point. It forced me to take control of my digital life in ways I never had before. I became an advocate for cybersecurity, sharing my story to help others avoid the same fate. My blog grew into a small community, with people sharing their own experiences and tips. I felt like I was making a difference, however small. I also started teaching workshops at local libraries, focusing on digital literacy for seniors and teens. It was rewarding to see people take their online safety seriously. Sarah even attended one of my workshops, cheering me on from the back. Our friendship was healing, slowly but surely. I realized that while the hack had taken so much, it had also given me a new purpose, a new voice. The police case didn't lead to any arrests, but I wasn't surprised. Cybercrime is a global problem, and catching the culprits is like finding a needle in a haystack. Still, I felt validated knowing my case was part of a larger investigation. I kept up with my blog, posting about new scams and how to spot them. My followers grew, and I started getting messages from people who'd avoided scams because of my advice. It was humbling to know I was helping, even in a small way. I also started saving again, slowly rebuilding my financial cushion. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to regain my stability. Sarah and I were talking more, and it felt good to have her back in my life, even if things weren't quite the same. I upgraded my cybersecurity setup, investing in better antivirus software and a hardware security key. I also started using encrypted messaging apps for sensitive conversations. It was a lot of work, but it gave me peace of mind. I'd learned that protecting my data was an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. I shared these tips on my blog, encouraging others to take similar steps. I also started a newsletter, summarizing the latest cybersecurity news and trends. It was a lot to juggle with my jobs, but it felt worth it. Sarah offered to help with the newsletter, and I let her, grateful for her support. Our friendship was starting to feel like a partnership again, built on new trust. I was proud of how far I'd come, even if the journey was painful. One day, I got an email from a woman who'd read my blog and wanted to share her story. She'd been hacked too, losing her retirement savings. Her story hit close to home, and we ended up talking for hours. I realized how much I'd learned, how much I could offer others. I started a podcast, interviewing victims of cybercrime and experts in the field. It was a way to amplify the voices of those who'd been through what I had. The podcast took off, and I was amazed at the response. People were hungry for real stories, for practical advice. Sarah helped me edit the episodes, and it felt like we were rebuilding something special. I was still cautious with my online presence, but I no longer let fear control me. I was taking my power back. Financially, I was finally stable again. I'd paid off all the fraudulent debt and had a small emergency fund saved. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I kept up my side gigs, using the extra income to invest in my blog and podcast. I also started speaking at more conferences, sharing my story with larger audiences. It was nerve-wracking, but it felt important. I wanted to show people that you could recover from something like this, that you could come out stronger. Sarah and I were closer than ever, working together on my projects. She admitted she'd been scared to tell me about the suspicious email, afraid of causing drama. I understood, even if it still stung. We were learning to communicate better, to be there for each other. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories and cybersecurity tips. Your support means the world.